Hi, these are the top 10 films of the year 2001. When I say top, I mean my personal favourite films. 2001 was a great year for cinema, so there's going to be loads of films I left off, so please include your favourites down below. And if you enjoy these videos, consider giving this a thumbs up, subscribing, and hitting that notification button. Cheers. Number 10. Monsters, Inc. One of Pixar's best. They were on such a run in the late 90s and early 2000s, making totally original, funny and moving movies. This film takes place in a world inhabited by mostly good-natured monsters. It's a world whose electricity is fueled by the fear of children. We follow two workers at a power-generating factory, Monsters, Inc. They use teleporting doors to enter the human world in order to terrify kids. But the monsters believe that the children are actually harmful and toxic. Our two monsters learn this is not the case when a toddler follows them to their world, and they need to return the cute girl before they are discovered. The relationship between the girl and the beast is genuinely touching. I do often get annoyed at Pixar's ability to manipulate my heartstrings, but luckily they keep the movie funny throughout. It may all just be zeros and ones, but Monsters, Inc. is a beautifully crafted family film. Pixar at their best. In at number 9, The Man Who Wasn't There. One of the Coens' most overlooked pictures. They are the masters of making films with unlikely protagonists, and their most loved movies, such as Fargo and The Big Lebowski, have wonderful, quirky central characters, while some of their most overlooked gems have quiet, awkward leads, such as Barton Fink in A Serious Man. And in The Man Who Wasn't There, we have a character who, by his own admission, is kind of a nobody. Billy Bob Thornton gives a wonderfully restrained, quiet performance as a barber who leads a dull life. He knows and does nothing about his wife's affair, and he just continues to cut the hair. But his life of boredom is thrown into disarray when a man gives him the opportunity to get involved in a new business idea: dry cleaning. The only thing is, he needs money. Our barber decides to blackmail his wife's lover and boss for the cash. And in typical noir fashion, everything goes very wrong indeed. Thornton is joined by a tremendous cast, including Frances McDormand, Scarlett Johansson, Tony Shalhoub, and the astonishing James Gandolfini. But stealing the show is the jaw-droppingly beautiful black and white cinematography from the GOAT, Roger Deakins. It's one of his best-looking films, and that's really saying something. The Coens are two of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and much like the barber at the centre of this film, this noir deserves more love. In at number 8, Y tu mamá también. One hell of a sexy road trip movie. This coming-of-age film follows two teenagers who take along an older woman on a car trip across Mexico. She initially declines their offer of a road trip to an idyllic private beach, but after discovering that her husband has been cheating on her, she decides to go. Well, the lads are now in a pickle as they made the beach up. The two boys are played by two iconic Mexican actors, Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna, and they play the two initially childish leads perfectly. This is a coming-of-age story where you really see what different people they are by the end of the film. And Maribel Verdú is equally as good as the woman who takes them on a journey of a sexual nature. It is a steamy picture, but also a deep one. Director Alfonso Cuarón is a marvelous filmmaker who is interested in making films about people, as well as making something cinematic. He started this century with a hell of a film and continues to be one of the great artists of our time. In at number 7, Millennium Actress. One of my favourite animes of all time. Well, I was always going to love this. It's directed by one of the greats of Japanese animation, Satoshi Kon. It deals with the history of both Japan and Japanese film, and is loosely based on my favourite actress of all time, Setsuko Hara. Haro was a hugely successful actress in Japan, but in the 60s left the industry and led a secluded life, never doing interviews or media appearances. Well, in this film, we follow two documentary filmmakers who find a secluded, formerly famous actress in order to interview her about her life. Much like Con's other films, it merges reality and fantasy beautifully. We follow her life through her films, and the characters within her actual life and the characters in the films she starred in start to merge. We get references to the films of Ozu and Kurosawa and even the Godzilla franchise. And at the same time, it paints a picture of 20th century Japan as a whole. It does all this while also being incredibly moving. A real masterpiece of anime. In at number 6, Amélie. Yes, it is a little twee, but it is adorable. Junet and Caro were an amazing partnership, making two astonishing films. But their partnership ended when Caro couldn't get along with the controlling producers of Alien Resurrection. And now this is Jean-Pierre Junet's first real film on his own with creative control. I loved Delicatessen and The City of Lost Children so much that I remember being unsure of this film when it first came out. It's certainly less dark and fantastical, but it has real heart, real imagination, and real joy running throughout it. We follow a shy, quirky waitress who decides to improve the lives of those around her without them realizing. Whether it's making two lonely people in her cafe think that they are in love with each other, or convincing her father to finally travel by sending him photos of one of his gnomes all around the world. It's all very heartwarming and cute, but the film is also full of slightly darker humour that totally keeps it afloat and stops it sinking into a sea of sentimentality. For instance, rather than help one person, she decides to torment the cruel local greengrocer by breaking into his flat and changing small things to make him think he is losing his mind. The cinematography is stunning, the cast is wonderful, and it's a delight to watch. This is a citron pressé with a hell of a lot of sugar, but enough lemon juice in it to not make it overly sweet. Here are some other notable releases of 2001. Steven Soderbergh made the Ocean's 11 remake, which starred, well, nearly everyone.
George Clooney, Matt Damon, Andy Garcia, Brad Pitt, and Julia Roberts.
But if you were British, you probably appeared in Gosford Park.
Alan Bates, Stephen Fry, Michael Gambon, Derek Jacobi, Kelly MacDonald, Helen Mirren, Jeremy Northam, Clive Owen, Ryan Phillippe, Kristen Scott Thomas, Maggie Smith, Emily Watson.
But don't worry, if you didn't get a part in that, you almost certainly got a part in Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down. The same year, Scott also made the rather silly sequel to The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal.
I would really like some.
It's good.
When you think of film and 2001, you think of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Tragically, Kubrick didn't make it to the year 2001, but his buddy Steven Spielberg did, and so made Kubrick's sci-fi Pinocchio story AI, featuring another great child performance from Haley Joel Osment. However, when watching it, you couldn't help but wish Kubrick had made it. But it was certainly a better film than that year's Jurassic Park 3, whose whole pitch seemed to consist of, what if there was a bigger dinosaur than a T-Rex? The bigger question, what would dinosaurs say if they could speak?
Alan!
For foreign cinema, you had Del Toro's The Devil's Backbone, the wonderfully twisted and sexual The Piano Teacher, and from Japan, you had Takeshi Miike's mental Ichi the Killer, and a feature film for one of my favourite shows of all time, Cowboy Bebop. For comedies, you had Ben Stiller's Zoolander, the hugely successful first Shrek, there was the fun A Knight's Tale, Reese Witherspoon shone in Legally Blonde, and in Bridget Jones's Diary, Renée Zellweger plays a woman who's really struggling. A depressed woman with a great job in TV, a flat in central London, and two heartthrobs who are literally fighting over her. Oh God, life can be hard, can't it? Nearly half a century ago, James Stewart had Harvey, but now Jake Gyllenhaal had a very different type of rabbit friend in Donnie Darko. Two huge franchises started with two rather middling films. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and The Fast and the Furious. Will Smith played a boxer in order to win an Oscar in Ali, and would years later be a boxer at the night he won one. The Best Actor awards at that year's Oscars went to Halle Berry for Monsters Ball, Denzel Washington's scene-stealing performance in Training Day, Jennifer Connelly for some reason won Best Supporting Actress for A Beautiful Mind. She also won at the BAFTAs, as did Russell Crowe for his starring role in the film. Also at the BAFTAs, he got furious when a poem he read got cut out, and so he assaulted the producer. Ah, Russell Crowe, fighting round the world. Fighting round the world, Russell Crowe. And at the Oscars, Jim Broadbent won Best Supporting Actor for Iris, when he should have won for his hilarious performance in Moulin Rouge. The film starred Ewan McGregor and Nicole Kidman, who also starred in that year's great horror film The Others. Also that year, she divorced Tom Cruise. While Cruise that year starred in the appropriately titled Vanilla Sky. And the worst or most disappointing film of the year had to be Tim Burton's reimagining of Planet of the Apes, where he fell in love with Helena Bonham Carter, who was in full ape makeup.
It's good.
Right, back to my top 10. In at number 5, Ghost World. One of my favourite snobbish answers to give if someone asks, what's your favourite comic book movie? Terry Ziegoff was the perfect director to adapt Daniel Close's comic. This pitch-black comedy is pitched perfectly. It's funny, depressing, downbeat, and a joy. Thora Birch gives the best performance of her career as a remarkably difficult teenage outsider.
We have to get together this summer.
Yeah. That'll definitely happen.
She is cruel to basically everyone, including her best friend, played by Scarlett Johansson, who once again gives a great early performance. The two girls decide to prank a man who places a personal ad in a paper. But soon Birch's Enid begins to find this pathetic man intriguing and gets closer to him. Steve Buscemi is brilliant as the isolated man who can't talk to women. It's full of wonderful offbeat humour, and the characters remain true to themselves, never changing for dramatic effect. It has a brilliantly slightly ambiguous ending, which has caused a lot of debate, and when I first watched it, I certainly saw it in a hugely tragic way. This isn't really a coming-of-age film, it's a failing to come-of-age film, with a wonderfully mean and messy protagonist.
I used to think about one day, just not telling anyone, going off to some random place. And I'd just disappear.
In at number 4, The Royal Tenenbaums. My personal favourite Wes Anderson film. I think this may come down to one thing, the presence of one of my favourite actors of all time, Gene Hackman. Anderson's films can be a little whimsical, and Bill Murray and a few others have always been a nice counternote to this. But the ever so slightly intimidating presence of Hackman at the centre of this film absolutely makes it for me.
They had agreed to invite their father to the party.
What'd you think, Dad?
Didn't seem believable to me.
Well, did you at least think the characters were well developed?
What characters? There's a bunch of little kids dressed up in the animal costumes.
Good night, everyone.
Well, sweetie, don't be mad at me. That's just one man's opinion. Happy birthday to you.
He is hilarious as the eccentric father of a rich and oddball family. He's an utter shit and a terrible dad who comes back into their lives after getting kicked out of the hotel he was living in. He lies to them, telling them that he is back because he is dying.
Well, I've had a good run.
You don't look so sick, Dad.
Thank you.
It's not fair to give all the credit to Hackman, as he is surrounded by one hell of a cast, all knocking it out of the park, as the highly talented family members who it's all kind of gone wrong for. Angelica Houston, Ben Stiller, Luke Wilson and Gwyneth Paltrow are superb as the other Tenenbaums. And as the other people in their lives, we get Danny Glover, Bill Murray and Owen Wilson. There isn't a bad performance in the picture, and they all have unique, well thought out characters. The other star of the film is of course Anderson himself, whose visual style is becoming more and more pronounced with each film. And this is my ideal level for one of his films. Highly stylized, but still very much in the real world. The script he wrote with Owen Wilson is hilarious, but also incredibly touching. Anderson juggles all these characters and manages to make a totally engrossing film that is only 1 hour and 49 minutes.
Are you ever coming home?
Maybe not.
You're joking.
No.
No, I want to die.
But now let's leave a quirky New York and cross the country to a very different city and a very different movie. In at number 3, Mulholland Drive. While I was editing this video, we lost David Lynch, one of the greatest directors of all time, a true one-of-a-kind artist who did things his own way. And back in 2001, he made one of his very best movies, a terrifying, surrealist neo-noir showing the dark side of Tinseltown. The plot follows an aspiring actress who arrives in Los Angeles where she befriends a woman suffering from amnesia after a car accident. The woman says she is in danger, and the two set out to find her identity. But there is a lot more than just this story. Many other sequences and characters come and go. It has a dreamlike quality, or should I say a nightmare-like quality. It has a hugely ambiguous ending that fantastically Lynch refused to comment on. The debate around the film has gone on for nearly a quarter of a century, and I have my feelings and theories on it. And I love that this is a film whose questions linger on just as much as the spellbinding imagery does. It is a Hollywood nightmare. It shows how dreadful the City of Angels can get for, well, the majority of people who don't make it there. Much like another film with a Los Angeles street name as its title, Sunset Boulevard, this is not about glitz and glamour, but about madness and suffering. And much like that Billy Wilder classic, this is also tremendously funny. I truly feel Lynch never gets enough credit for just how funny his films and shows were. This is a film about the dark heart of Hollywood, but what is amazing is how much Lynch actually loved the city. It became his home, and it is beautiful hearing him talk about it.
I live in Hollywood, and I love Los Angeles and Hollywood. I love it because I love the light. I love the light so much. And Los Angeles is spread out. And I don't know what it is about it. I have a feeling of freedom in Los Angeles. So it's the light and freedom.
The fires this year have been utterly devastating. And while suffering from emphysema, he was evacuated from his home and died a few days later. I hate the idea of the city whose light he loved so much becoming such a different, almost frightening hue as he left and couldn't breathe. Indeed, it sounds like a nightmarish scene from one of his films. That beautiful light over Hollywood will return. But the light that is lost forever is the light that Lynch brought to cinema. In at number 2. This is the film that made me want to read as a kid. As soon as it ended, I ran out of the cinema, went to the shops and bought The Hobbit because it was a lot shorter. The Beatles are my favourite band, and Stanley Kubrick is my favourite director. But thank God the Fab Four's plans to have Kubrick direct them in an adaptation of Tolkien's classic never happened. Kubrick felt it was unfilmable, although if anyone could have done it in the 60s, it would have been him. He went on to film 2001, and eventually in 2001, Peter Jackson's masterful adaptation was released. Jackson truly did something remarkable here. He turned the greatest fantasy novels of all time, about short people with hairy feet walking across a country to throw a magical ring into a volcano, into one of the greatest trilogies of all time. Everything here is filmmaking on an exceptional level. The cinematography, the sets, the costumes, the practical effects, the casting, Howard Shore's score, and the pacing of this 3-hour epic. This is my favourite of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It has the least CGI, and the world feels gritty and dirty. Wounds fester, and the beer looks delicious.
What's that? This, my friend, is a pint. It comes in pints? Oh. I can get you one.
The action scenes feature wonderful choreography, and it has just the right amount of swords and arrow violence that as a little kid I couldn't get enough of. The joy of watching this in the cinema, then waiting for the sequel the next year that didn't disappoint, and then getting the extended edition of Fellowship at Christmas and watching it as a family, and then repeating that the very next year. At no point did it disappoint. The Lord of the Rings trilogy are the greatest fantasy films of all time, and Fellowship is, for my money, the best one. But speaking of great fantasy films, and in at number 1, Spirited Away. I am ashamed to say that it took me years to finally watch this Hayao Miyazaki film. I think the universal love for it made my stupid teenage brain turn my nose up to it. This became the big film that I'd never seen. But then when I finally saw it, I felt so stupid for denying myself the pleasure of having this masterpiece in my life for so long. For me, this is Miyazaki's best film, and that is really saying something, as his filmography is simply stellar. We follow a young girl who moves to a new house with her parents, but they accidentally enter the world of Kami, where her parents are turned into pigs and she begins to work at a bathhouse run by a witch. I'm quite partial to a hot bath, which is another reason I find this film so wonderful. Like a warm blanket. The animated steam warms my bones when I watch it. The fantasy world is so imaginative, so arresting, and so beautiful, and at all times is simultaneously cute and terrifying. In many ways, it's like a modern-day Alice in Wonderland. And this world holds up right next to Lewis Carroll's hugely influential fantasy world. A world which is magical and beautiful, but where threats lurk around every corner. But Spirited Away is also uniquely Japanese, and Japanese traditional culture runs through it. This is a fantasy world unlike anything else on the silver screen before it. But often in these sort of films, where someone enters a fantasy world, the fantasy world is so riveting that the central character kind of fades into the background. But what Miyazaki does so well is have a protagonist just as riveting as the world she has found herself in. She is a wonderfully relatable and fully realized character that you can't help but fall in love with. This is a masterpiece of animation, and is proof that sometimes you have to believe the buzz. A rightfully universally praised fantasy film. Right, so counting down my top 10. In at number 10, Monsters, Inc. In at number 9, The Man Who Wasn't There. In at number 8, Y Mamá También. In at number 7, Millennium Actress. In at number 6, Amélie. In at number 5, Ghost World. In at number 4, The Royal Tenenbaums. In at number 3, Mulholland Drive. In at number 2, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. And in at number 1, Spirited Away. Well, those were my top 10 films of 2001. What did I leave out? Loads, probably. So what are your top 10 films of 2001? Cheers.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.